Jason had only been living in Maplewood Estates for 3 months when he first met Karen, the HOA president everyone in the neighborhood whispered about but tried to avoid. It was a calm Tuesday afternoon, and Jason was in the middle of a virtual work meeting when a sharp knock echoed through his front door. At first, he ignored it, assuming it was a delivery, but the knocking grew louder, more impatient. With a sigh, he muted his mic and went to answer. On his porch stood a woman in her late 50s, her hair pulled tight into a bun that looked as rigid as her expression. She held a clipboard in one hand, a tablet in the other, and wore a neon vest labeled HOA Compliance. Her smile was more of a smirk as she spoke. "Good afternoon, Mr. Collins. I'm Karen from the Maplewood HOA. I'll need your house access code for our emergency inspection record." Jason blinked, unsure if he'd heard correctly. "My house code? You mean my front door code?" he asked, half laughing at the absurdity. "Yes," Karen replied curtly. "All residents are required to provide access in case of emergency maintenance or safety checks. You're behind on your compliance forms." She tapped her clipboard as if that somehow made her demand official. Jason felt irritation rising. "I'm not comfortable giving out my code to anyone," he said firmly. "If there's ever an emergency, I'll handle it myself or call someone authorized." Karen's smile vanished. "That's not how it works here, Mr. Collins. We have standards. Non-compliance leads to fines, and I don't want to start your record off that way." He folded his arms. "You can fine me all you want. You're not getting my code." Then he closed the door gently but decisively. Behind it, he could hear her muttering something about defiant new homeowners and setting an example. Jason shook his head, trying to refocus on work, but the encounter lingered. Within an hour, an email from the HOA arrived, notice of violation, failure to provide property access. That night, he checked his security cameras before bed. For a moment, he caught sight of Karen's car idling by the sidewalk, her headlights off. The uneasy feeling in his stomach told him this was far from over. Jason's work trip came just a week after his confrontation with Karen. He was heading out of town for a 3-day conference, confident that locking his smart home system and setting up security cameras would keep everything safe. Still, a nagging worry about Karen lingered in the back of his mind. Her last visit had been unsettling, and her tone in the HOA email suggested she wasn't done with him yet. On the second evening of his trip, Jason's phone buzzed with a security alert. His motion sensors had picked up activity at the front door. Curious, he opened the live feed. There, under the glow of his porch light, stood Karen, clipboard in hand again, with another person he didn't recognize. Jason watched as she spoke animatedly to a locksmith, pointing at his front door. The locksmith seemed hesitant, but Karen waved papers in his face as if she had authority. Jason immediately hit record. Through the camera's microphone, her voice came through faintly. "The homeowner gave verbal permission last week. Emergency safety inspection." The locksmith muttered something and tried to unlock the deadbolt. Jason's pulse quickened. He called the local police department and reported an attempted illegal entry in progress, providing his address and video proof. By the time officers arrived, the locksmith's van was gone, and Karen's SUV was just pulling away. The police checked the property and found no forced entry, but they did notice something odd: a folded envelope taped to Jason's door. When the officers opened it, they found a handwritten note and a printed motel receipt. "Due to your unavailability, I had to stay elsewhere while conducting HOA safety verification," the note read in perfect cursive. "Please reimburse $247.83 to the HOA within 5 business days." Jason was stunned. He immediately called the motel listed on the receipt and confirmed that Karen herself had stayed there for one night, charging it to her personal card, then labeling it as an HOA business expense. It was audacious even for her. By the time he returned home, he felt both angry and violated. He sent copies of the footage, the note, and the receipt to the rest of the HOA board. It was clear Karen had crossed a line, but something in his gut told him she still didn't think she'd done anything wrong. When Jason walked into the next HOA meeting, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The usual small talk and coffee chatter were replaced by awkward silence as residents glanced at him, whispering in hushed tones. At the front of the room, Karen sat in her usual spot, center stage, with her clipboard stacked on a pile of documents as if to build a fortress of authority. Her expression was smug, like she already knew she would win whatever argument was about to happen. Jason took a deep breath, holding a manila folder filled with screenshots, video captures, and printouts of emails. He had no intention of letting her intimidate him this time. When the floor opened for community concerns, he stood up. "I have something that needs to be addressed," he said, his voice calm but cutting through the tension like a blade. "This involves an attempted unlawful entry into my property last week by our HOA president." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Karen straightened up, eyes narrowing. "That's a very serious accusation, Mr. Collins," she said coldly. "You should be careful with your words." "I was conducting a safety inspection, as allowed under HOA guidelines." Jason opened his folder and began handing out copies of the photos. "Your so-called inspection involved hiring a locksmith to open my front door while I was out of town. You told him you had permission, which you didn't. I also have a police report and footage from my security camera to prove it." The room went dead silent. The treasurer, an older man named Mr. Daniels, frowned as he looked at the images. "Karen, this looks bad. You can't enter someone's home without consent." Karen's face turned red. "I was acting in the community's best interest. His home hadn't passed safety compliance." Jason cut her off. "And what about this?" He pulled out the motel receipt she'd taped to his door. "You billed me for your hotel stay, claiming it was a reimbursement." "That's fraud, Karen." A collective gasp moved through the room. Even her closest supporters looked away. The HOA secretary quietly began taking notes, while the treasurer muttered something about calling for a board review. For the first time, Karen looked rattled. She stood up, stammering about protocols and miscommunication, but no one was listening anymore. The evidence spoke louder than her excuses, and Jason knew she was finally cornered. 2 days after the explosive HOA meeting, Jason was sipping coffee on his porch when a police cruiser slowly turned into the cul-de-sac. For a second, he thought it was just a routine patrol until the car stopped right in front of Karen's house. Another vehicle arrived soon after, an unmarked sedan with 2 officers stepping out, holding papers in their hands. The neighborhood quickly came alive with curiosity. Curtains twitched, and doors cracked open as neighbors peeked out to see what was happening. Jason set down his mug and watched quietly as the officers approached Karen's front door. Within moments, the loud echo of a firm knock filled the street. Karen opened the door, still in her morning robe, visibly confused. Jason couldn't hear every word, but the tone was unmistakable. The officers showed her a document, likely the warrant, and within seconds, Karen's confusion turned to panic. Her voice rose, sharp and defensive, claiming it was all a misunderstanding and that she was protecting community safety. But the officers didn't waver. One of them calmly read out her charges: trespassing, harassment, and misuse of HOA funds. The second officer placed her in handcuffs while she continued protesting, insisting that Jason had set her up. Neighbors whispered from driveways, phones out, some recording, others just watching the self-proclaimed queen of the neighborhood finally face the consequences of her arrogance. Jason felt a strange mix of relief and pity. He hadn't wanted it to come this far, but Karen's obsession with control had left no choice. A few moments later, the officers led her to the patrol car. The flashing red and blue lights reflected off the white fences and manicured lawns that had once been her pride. Later that evening, an emergency HOA board meeting was called. Karen was immediately removed from her position, and new bylaws were drafted